Good evening, everyone. Today I'd like to talk about something a little bit different from the other videos that I've done. I'd like to talk a little bit about drawing and sketching and painting in the outdoors, or when you're going hiking. A lot of people, when they go hiking or when they travel, they tend to bring cameras with them these days, and it seems like almost everything that people do these days to record their memories or to get some ideas about the places that they've been or to look back on things, they tend to go for cameras. And I do the same thing. I love photography. I've been doing it since I was 10 years old. It's something that I really, really love, and it really helps to make my travels when I go around different places a lot better and brings back a lot of memories. And it also helps me to look at the places that I'm going in and to be a little bit more creative than just simply walking through. But it seems that just about everything that we record these days on the internet is with photography and with videos and things like that. But there are other ways to do things like that. You can go to a place and think of music and perhaps bring your musical instrument with you and play, or go back home and try to remember the places that you've been and try to write a song about it. Or you can learn how to storytell, and when you get back you can sit with your people or your friends and your family and tell them stories about the places that you go, directly, face to face. There's another way, though, that I find tends to help me to remember places a lot better than when I do with photography. The simple act of drawing or sketching forces you to stop and to look at the places that you're in. And in order to get it onto paper, it has to be something that you understand. And by understanding, you're able to put it onto the paper. So it has a very different effect on you when you're sitting and drawing compared to photography. You can go to a place with a camera, look at it for 1 second, lift your camera, snap a picture without really thinking about it, and then go home. But for a drawing, you can't do that. You've got to stop, and you've got to look, and you've got to understand what it is that you're looking at. And that helps for when you're trying to remember a place, or it helps you to understand the way something looks, or the way something moves, or the way something is colored, or even the way it happens to be related to the things around it. So, for instance, there are a lot of places that I've been around the world that I would sit down and draw, and then many years later I would look at my sketchbook and I'd vividly remember those places. Another thing that often happens is I will go traveling somewhere or hiking, and as I'm walking I don't have time to stop, but I'll look at it very carefully and I'll try to remember every moment of it. And then when I get home, I take out the journal and I would sit and try to remember what it is that I saw and then put that into a drawing. And just in the same way that writing a journal can help you to remember what happened during the day, drawing a picture helps you to remember what it looked like, or even to remember certain interactions that you had with other people, or things that you maybe felt, like you maybe were scared of something, and by drawing it you can remember it really well. And that's something that unless you're really, really careful with a camera, it's very hard to do the same way that you can when you have a sketchbook with you, when you're drawing it. So today what I would like to do is to introduce a little bit about the kinds of sketchbooks that I use, the pens and pencils and brushes that I use, and a little bit about the different ways that I draw, and maybe show you a few of the drawings that I've had, and maybe just give you an idea of what it is that I do when I'm hiking and drawing at the same time. I'll also try to talk a little bit about ways to carry the things that you carry. It tends to be a little bit lighter than when you're carrying a camera, especially when you're carrying a DSLR or even a mirrorless camera. Usually you only need one sketchbook and maybe one pen or maybe one pencil. And if you want to do some watercolor, maybe a little bit extra with a watercolor kit and a brush and a little bottle to hold the water in. But usually not much more than that. So let's get to it, see what kinds of things I can show you and see what it's all about. Okay, now here I have a selection of different things that I might bring when I go hiking. You can see that I have different sizes of sketchbooks. And I'll bring the different sizes according to the trip that I'm going on. If I don't really care about how heavy my pack is and I just want to take time to make some bigger drawings and be able to get into the more details when I'm drawing or when I'm painting, I might bring something as big as this. And these are two different kinds of the larger sketchbooks. And here you will see one of them is just a simple sketchbook with very thin paper. The other one is a heavier type of sketchbook. And this one has much thicker paper that you would use for something like watercolor so that the paper wouldn't buckle as you're painting. I tend to prefer this if I can, but the problem is that it's very heavy. And also, in order to be able to paint on it, I need to bring extra equipment for the painting itself. But that can be taken care of by the type of watercolor kit that you bring with you. Smaller ones would include, this is what I would normally bring, something about this size. You also have much smaller ones that are about this size. This would be like a moleskin. This I would bring only if I was really, really concerned about how heavy my pack was and how much volume I was going to carry. So if I was going to go really, really ultra light and every single gram that I had counted, then I might bring something like this. Even this one, though, because of the cover, it can be a little bit heavy. So I might not bring this, and I might actually bring something like this, which is much lighter. The problem is that the paper is thin, and while it's pretty good for pencil and also for ink drawings, it probably isn't so good for when I want to do watercolor. So something like this would probably be a little bit better. You have different types, like this one here would be like sketching. This one would probably be best for something like pencil. And the reason for that is for the type of paper that you have here. Now, one of the things that you have to think about when you get a sketchbook is the type of paper that you have. Now, like I was saying before, thicker paper tends to be better for things like watercolor. And then thinner paper tends to be lighter and also often has a finer grain, so you're able to draw without having the tip of your pencil or your pen stick to the paper. So you'd have to think about something like that. So when you go to the store, you might want to run your finger over the surface of the paper to get a feel for what kind of paper it is. Probably the best thing would be that in the store, if there would be some sample paper there, to be able to bring the pen that you're going to use or the pencil that you're going to use and run it over and see how it goes. If it sticks or if it tends to scratch up and parts of the paper come off, then you know that it's probably not very good for what you want to use. One of the things that I often do when I'm just walking around, or if I'm not so concerned with the quality of my drawings, I might bring something like a scrap paper book like this, which is very, very cheap. The paper isn't the best paper, but it's just good enough to be able to do quick sketches and quick writing and stuff like that, of whatever it is that you want to see. And this could be used for something like taking notes, or if you are in a hurry, like you're hiking and you can't stop so much, you may want to do something like taking photographs, where you just take a snap of something. So for something like this, you might do a 3-minute sketch where you're just quickly throwing the lines together and then you move on. And then later when you sit down, you can take more time to rearrange the drawing and make it a little bit better than what you originally drew. Now, as you can see, I have these 3 things over here in plastic bags. When you're hiking, of course, or whenever time you're outside and you have no way to get away from the weather, it helps to have a cover for your notebooks or for your sketchbooks, just to make sure that they don't get wet. That's one of the problems with sketching outdoors, is that if it does rain, often you won't be able to sit down and draw, unlike like when you take photographs with a camera. So I bring these things to make sure that my sketchbooks are protected. I also bring it partly to organize whatever I'm bringing with me. And when I'm doing it very simply, I might just bring this thing and then maybe one pen or one pencil that I'm going to be using exclusively for that trip, and just put them in here together. And that would make it really simple. When you're hiking, you want to keep things as simple as possible. And for something like this, you just put it in a side pocket somewhere, and whenever you need it, you just take it out and you take your pen and you open your book and you start sketching, and put it back into the pocket again when you're finished. Another thing that I often bring with me, instead of just a pen, I will bring a small pencil case. This one is waterproof, made out of Tyvek, and so therefore the contents can be protected even in the rain also. And in here I will have, usually I'll have one pencil, I'll have one brush, like this. This is a cartridge brush. Sometimes I'll have a watercolor pencil, so that if I draw like a pencil and then later go over with a watered down brush, then I can actually make shades and things like that, or I can have a watercolor effect with this pencil. And I'll also bring a pen, sometimes just a ballpoint pen, sometimes like this one over here, a dedicated drawing pen. Sometimes, if I have the time and if I'm not too worried about spilling ink, I might bring a nib with a small bottle of ink, but I tend to do that only rarely. But one of the things I like about that is it produces really beautiful lines. I also will bring a small watercolor kit. There's the Western style. I don't have my Japanese style with me at the moment. This is a Western style, and inside you have the water, you have a small brush, you have a sponge to be able to clean off your brush, and you have the watercolor pigments inside here, and then a palette where you can mix the colors together. And this place over here would be where you put the water, and then that's where you would mix the paints as you're painting. And it's very small, it's only about the size of my palm, and quite light. And the selection of colors is pretty good. One thing you want to be careful is the quality of your watercolor paints. If you buy a really cheap one, they often don't hold very well to the paper, or else the pigment and the color that you want is not quite what you're looking for. So whenever you are looking at the paints, you probably would like to get something as good as possible for the amount that you're paying for. Another thing you might consider when you're getting a sketchbook is you're going to be outside, and very often when you're hiking, you're not going to have a table, or you're not going to have any place where you can set your sketchbook down and draw. So if you have a soft cover sketchbook, when you put it onto your knees or you put it onto a rock or something, very often it'll bend, especially when you're putting pressure onto the sketchbook. And especially when you're doing watercolors and the water might run, whenever something bends like that, it's going to get harder to draw, and it's going to get harder to keep the water on the paper itself. So one of the things to consider, and maybe it might even be an important thing, is that the sketchbook has a hard cover, so that when you're putting it on your lap, it doesn't bend and it doesn't move around as you're drawing. Another thing to consider too is when you have a spiral bound sketchbook like this, instead of having a book with a spine on it like this, which can only open like this at this point, and it tends to leave a crease in the middle which tends to curve in and is very difficult to draw on sometimes. One of the things you might consider is a spiral bound. Spiral bound, what it will do is that you'll be able to bend it backwards like this, and if it has a hard cover, it won't bend. And therefore you're able to put it on your lap and basically use it as a small table as you're trying to draw. Another thing that I often bring with me when I'm hiking is an umbrella. And what the umbrella does is, well, especially on rainy days, it often helps to have the umbrella so that you can open it up over you and try to set it down somewhere as you're sitting down, and you're able to sit there and draw as the umbrella is over you. It can also be pretty good for when you have a very hot day, or for a day when the sun is very bright and you need to be able to cover your sketchbook a little bit to give it some shade so that you can look at it without the bright shining glare of the paper itself. And that's what I use this for often. So I guess now we should start talking about the drawing itself, which for many people is probably the hardest part of what I'm talking about. A lot of people believe that drawing is really, really hard, and it could have a lot to do with when you were children. If you notice, adults who draw pictures and who don't know how to do it, the way that they tend to draw tends to be very similar to what children up to about 10 years old draw. And basically what it means is that all children start out basically the same. They have the same abilities to draw for most of them. And they all develop in the same progression from very, very simple drawings which have very flat ways of seeing things and gradually being able to see the world in a different way. And that comes out in their drawings and their ability to see how heads are formed and how legs are formed, or how a house is built, or how a tree is formed, gradually begins to develop as they get older. And what often happens is when you start out, you are just a kid and you just start drawing the way that you'd want to do and the way that you're interested in. But then you get into school at about 10 years old. And in school, you are discouraged from drawing. And what you learn tends to be other things besides drawing. And so basically your development stops when you're about 10 years old. And that's why later on, when you become an adult, you start drawing in the same way that 10-year-old kids do. Children who continue to draw after 10 years old and who have formal education in drawing and other kinds of art, they often are able to develop more deeply in their way that they draw, or those kids who just continue to draw on their own without the influence of schools and things like that. If you learn the techniques that are part of the progression after your 10-year-old development, it actually is quite easy to learn how to draw, and you're able to both draw realistically and you're able to draw stylistically, depending on what your interests are. Most people tend to like the realistic drawings, and that is something that you can learn if you just practice the different techniques of how to see things and how to get that onto paper. Now, most people would think of drawing as sitting at a table, probably inside somewhere, and drawing something. That tends to be much easier than when you go hiking. Often when you go hiking, you don't have a lot of time to be sitting somewhere and drawing unless you're just doing a very slow hike. Usually when you're hiking, you need to move from one place to another. So your breaks tend to be rather short, and you don't have a lot of time to sit there and draw something. So when you're hiking, it helps to learn how to see things quickly and to understand what you're looking at quickly, and then to get that down on paper. And usually what that comes in is in a form of sketching. And sketching is basically just very quickly looking at something, trying to get the form of it, and then scribbling that down onto a piece of paper. Scribbling it down on a piece of paper basically means that you're looking at the geometric forms of things around you, and then quickly getting your pen to fill in the spaces between that. So basically what it means is that you're learning how to see. When you're drawing something, it doesn't have to be really complicated. It doesn't have to be something really refined as you're doing it, especially when you're sketching something. Basically just get the form of what you're looking at and give the impression of what you're trying to get across in your drawing. Partly it is so that you don't spend a lot of time drawing, and part of it is so that you can get a lot of drawings in and then just go home, and later on you can go over your sketches and make them a little bit more detailed. So don't worry about how great your drawing is. Just get what it is that you want to get across, and if the drawing isn't great, that's fine. One of the things about learning how to draw is to just relax and let the mistakes happen, and then learn from the mistakes as you get better and better. As I was saying earlier, what you want to do is to learn how to see. And what learning how to see means is being able to discern the geometric forms of things around you, and being able to see things like light and shadow, and also being able to see the background and the foreground and the middle ground. Each of these things will add something to the drawing that you're making and will help you understand what it is that you're looking at. When starting out, the first thing that you probably want to do is to look at the place around you and try to see the basic forms of everything there. Now, when you look at everything, it might seem chaotic, especially when you have lots of leaves around you. Or let's say you're looking at a city and there are lots and lots of buildings within the city. You don't need to focus on those details in the beginning. That will come later. In the beginning, what you want to do is to look at the basic geometric forms of the things around you. Now, for instance, behind me, you can see the ground, which has a disc-like form, and it's laying flat in a horizontal way. So try to get that disc-like form in there. Now beyond the disc, you see a wall of bamboo. And when you look at it, at first, you get the feeling like all those leaves and the bushes that are in front, with all their leaves too and their branches, that you have to focus on all of those details when you're drawing it. And that would make it really difficult because there are so many different things that you have to concentrate on. But don't worry about that in the beginning. Do that later, after you've got the basics down. So you have the disc, and then behind that you have this ring of bamboo, like a wall. So get that in there as a line. Then beyond that, you have the trees, or the big bushes that you have behind the bamboo, and each of them comes as some of them are like semicircles, other ones come in triangles. Sometimes you have like the tree over there is an upside down triangle, and then behind that you have the mountain, and the mountain itself is sort of a roundish conical shape. So get that in there as a roundish conical shape. And that's all you have to do in the beginning, is to get that basic geometric collection of forms that you have. Once you get that in, then look at each individual part within that frame. So you'd have the wall of bamboo over there, and each one of them, you can see clumps of them. Each of them would have a geometrical form too. Or you have these bushes on the side over here. The bush right behind the tree over here basically is an upside down triangle form. And within that you have these branches, each of which also form little triangles, upside down triangles. And they all connect together to form the branches and the parts of the tree. So see that first, and that's where you get started when you're looking at a landscape or even a human face. Or anything that you're drawing. Buildings in particular are very geometrical forms. Then after that, you will look at the light and dark parts of the whatever you're looking at. A lot of people will look at a tree and they'll see a big green thing, and then they'll see all the leaves on it. But what they'll often do is to miss the fact that the tree has a back and a front. And depending on where the light is coming from, but usually when the light is coming from above, you'll see parts of the tree that are lighter where the sun is hitting, and then parts of the tree which are darker, where the light isn't hitting. So try to get those two different parts in there too. Just quickly cross-hatch the area, or quickly move back and forth with your pencil to get a shade. And get those shades in there, but keep the other parts which are light, keep them without shade on them. So you get a basic color or a basic light and dark figuration of what the drawing is about. And then from there, as you progress, you begin to gradually put in more of the details. Now, like if you're looking at the leaves, they all have different forms. They all have different shapes. Try to get the basic shape of what the leaves are. Like bamboo leaves have a elongated form. And then, I don't know the name of this tree, this bush, they have little rounded leaves. Or the tree above over here has a pointed oblong shape. So each of them have different things. However, it's not necessary to draw every single leaf. Most likely, even if you tried, you wouldn't be able to get all the different leaves that are in whatever scene that you're looking at, especially here with all these bamboo leaves over here. So basically look at it first before you draw, contemplate it, and then try to get the gist of the leaves themselves. Like the bamboos over here behind, you can see they all hang down in a similar direction. They're all pointing basically in the same direction. So get a few lines in there that all point in that same direction. And as the leaves move along, you can see that the leaves change direction as you're doing. So change the direction of the lines as you go. But basically get simplified forms of that, of those lines, and don't worry about every single detail and every single leaf that you see in the picture. For instance, if you look at the ground, you can see the roots back here, and you can see some stones, and then you see some, these are big seeds. I'm not sure what this tree is. But basically you have little forms in there. Get a few of them in the picture, but don't try to draw every single one of them. Just a few will give you a sense of what it is that you're looking at. I tend to do two different kinds of drawings when I'm outside. Normally, I'm hiking and I need to move from one place to another before it gets dark, or if I have certain sections which are dangerous, I need to move quickly through them. So I often don't have time to sit down and slowly draw a place, which I actually love doing if I have the time. What I will do for the quick sketches is to stand with my notebook, look at something, and without taking any time to look at the details, I will just quickly swing the point of my pen or my pencil over all the different geometries that I just talked about. And very often what I'll do is not lift the pen from the paper, just move from one part to another in a cursive manner. And that gets the basic form of what I want. Sometimes I'll try to get a shadow by just quickly swinging back and forth over the paper through that one area to get it a little bit darker. And then I'll just swing the tip of the pencil back and forth across a mountaintop to get the shadow side and then the lighter side, and then get the basic form of the mountain itself. And then later on, when I go back and I look at those quick sketches, I can remember what it is that I was looking at, and I can take some time to draw a more detailed version of that drawing. My longer drawings, I tend to sit down in one place for a long time, and I basically lose myself in the drawing. I'll look at it for a very long time. I'll try to first get the gist of it, then I'll try to see what the details are, the light, the shadows, the shapes, the directionality of the lines, the background and foreground, middle ground, haziness. Very often things which are far away will appear more hazy than things which are more nearby. Drawing for a long time can be very peaceful, and it gives me a very good sense of the place that I'm going to. So if I have a chance, I really would like to sit down somewhere and really take in a place and take time to draw it. Usually that happens when I reach the campground and I finished making dinner and there's still light. I'll sit down on a rock somewhere and just basically take the time to draw the whole place. So that's it for a basic, short, small introduction to how to draw while you're hiking. Gives you a better idea maybe of how to get started. Definitely isn't something to teach you exactly how to draw, but it's a good way to get started. Taking classes can really help you to learn how to see. One of the books that I recommend is Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, which is one of the books that helped me learn how to improve my drawing and also helped me to teach others how to draw too. Anyway, I hope you enjoy getting out there and drawing, and just forget about trying to make a perfect drawing. Just get out there and enjoy what you see and try to get the gist of it. And even if it looks like a children's drawing, at least you drew something, and at least you looked at it, and at least you began to understand what it is that you're looking at.